So why don't we get started? Good afternoon to everyone. We're grateful you've carved out time to join us for the next hour, when you likely put on hold many demands to do so. Our goal is to ensure your commitment is worthwhile with a program we hope enriches and informs you. I'm David McCreary, Director of Major Gifts at Feinberg School of Medicine, and it's my privilege to work with Dr. Moskowitz and introduce her today. But prior to doing so, I want to express sincere appreciation to those of you who are with us, including Feinberg alumni who blazed the trail and made possible today's successes at the medical school. We are mindful every day that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Those of you who are donors to Feinberg and Northwestern, who in a very real way make a groundbreaking research and clinical advances possible with your generosity and philanthropy. We need you. And current Feinberg faculty, amazing people doing incredible work every day. One of those marvelous professionals is Dr. Judy Moskowitz, our speaker today. Dr. Moskowitz earned her PhD at Dartmouth College and MPH at the University of California, Berkeley. She is a professor and vice chair for scientific and faculty development at Feinberg's Department of Medical Social Sciences. With a background in social psychology and public health, Dr. Moskowitz has dedicated the past 20 years to studying behavioral and psychosocial factors in the context of health-related and other stressful life events. Her current research focuses on a positive emotion intervention developed by her team, which aims to increase positive emotions, reduce stress and depression, and improve health behaviors in at-risk populations. This includes trials with Alzheimer's caregivers, people living with HIV, frontline gun violence prevention staff. Judy is a skilled investigator, an innovative thinker, and a dynamic person. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Judy Moskowitz.
Thank you, Dave. No pressure there for that intro. I really appreciate the invitation and appreciate you taking the time to hear a little bit more about the work we've been doing. There we go. So I study the adaptive function of positive emotion in the midst of stress. This work started for me when I was a postdoc several years ago at the University of California, San Francisco. And I was helping on a study of men caring for their partners with AIDS. And this was before the more effective treatments. So AIDS was essentially a terminal illness. And we were interviewing the men every other month for up to 5 years throughout the caregiving and then bereavement process, and really looking at the stress of caregiving, the stress of bereavement, and asking the men how they coped with it. So we would initially in the study, we would end the interview with what we call the stress and coping interview. So we'd say, tell us something stressful that happened in the past week, either related to caregiving or to bereavement. And then, they would tell us about it, and then we would hand them the ways of coping questionnaire. So this is a checklist of ways of coping. We said, which of these did you use to cope with that thing you just told us about? And then that was the end of the interview. And we said, see you in 2 months. So shortly after the start of the study, the men were like, wait a minute, you're not asking us about the good things that are happening. And, as stress and coping researchers, we were like, what do you mean the good things? This is horrific. And they agreed. They said, yes, this is horrific. This is stressful. And I'm depressed and anxious and sad and scared and grieving. And there are also moments of positive emotion and good things that are happening. And can we please talk about them? So we added a question to the end of the interview that we called the positive, meaningful event. And we said, tell us something that happened in the past week, something positive and meaningful that helped you get through a day. And in like 99% of the interviews, even if the partner had just died, they could come up with something positive. And it ended up being kind of an intervention in itself, in that they would come into the interview and say, I've got one today. So they would now start looking out for the good things to then tell us about in this interview. So based on that finding and some other work we were doing, I decided that what was needed was a program of skills, a way to help people have more positive emotion, no matter what kind of stress they're experiencing. So I put together this sort of multi-component intervention. Each of these things individually has been shown to increase positive emotion. So we now teach them as kind of a buffet, try them all, find what works for you, and then keep doing it. Take it up as a habit. You'll see down along the bottom, this work has been funded by a nice, robust line of support from the National Institute of Health, which we will talk about a little bit more later. So what we've done with this program, we have tested it in a lot of different populations experiencing different kinds of stress. So I started testing it in people newly diagnosed with HIV, dementia caregivers, cancer survivors, women with metastatic breast cancer, children awaiting heart transplant. Elfie Paul, if you're in the audience, I saw that you had signed up. People with diabetes, gun violence prevention workers, the general public during COVID, healthcare workers, NPR listeners, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Basically, as soon as I started this program, and like I said, the first trial was in people newly diagnosed with HIV, but I would go out and I would present it and people would come up to me and they'd say, oh, would this work in, my preferred stressed group? My answer was always, well, let's try it. So that's how we ended up trying it across all these different groups experiencing different types of life stress. Something cute about my program is we tend to name most of our studies after using plant and flower acronyms. So IRIS was the first one, which stands for Intervention for Those Recently Informed of Their Seropositive Status. And then it just goes on. There's a couple in there that are not plants or flowers. Those are sort of lines of work taken up by mentees of mine, so they get to name their own studies. And it gets a little ridiculous. Those two at the end, begonia and daffodil, are of two of my graduate students. The begonia PI just got her PhD. So, and I'm clear with them that they don't have to name their programs. They don't even have to do their dissertation in this program, but they continue anyway. One of the things we're learning is that these skills work if you do them. So one of our challenges is to figure out the optimal delivery mode for each group, each of the groups. So, we've delivered the intervention one-on-one in person. We've done it on Zoom. We've done it individually or in groups. We've got a self-guided online version. I've got collaborators who have developed a text message version, a virtual reality version to use in like dialysis patients. So we're trying all kinds of different ways to get these skills to people so that they can learn them and again, take them up as habits. So I'll tell you about one particular study that we did recently. Just over a year ago, Allison Aubrey of NPR reached out to me, and she and I have talked over the years. She started covering some of my work and has been a fan. So when she reached out last spring, she said, we're going to do a series on stress and stress reduction leading up to the election, to the presidential election last fall. Could NPR listeners enroll in your program in the self-guided version of it? And I thought about it for about 30 seconds. And I was like, if Allison Aubrey is asking me to do this, I'm going to say yes, right? So we went ahead, we got human subjects approval for it. And, had added built in some questionnaires so we could actually see whether people's well-being was improving as they went through the program. The only reason we were able to do this, again, without funding, is because I'd had 20 years and $30 million of NIH funding to support the program, to bring it to a point where I had a thing that I could then share more broadly with the NPR listeners. So the way my team thought about this was, well, let's try to make this as low burden for us and for the participants, but especially for us, so that people would, learn about the program. They would fill out an eligibility questionnaire. They would then be taken to a consent form in REDCap. Those of you who are familiar with the sort of survey software that we use at Northwestern, they filled out their consent on REDCap. They then did a baseline questionnaire with all the well-being scales and some demographics. And then REDCap talked directly to our developer, the platform that delivers the skills. It's called Bright Outcome. And so there usually when we do a research study using the platform, we have a human in there who then calls the participant, makes sure they understand the consent, and then helps them get onto the platform. This time we thought that we might get, several thousand people into the program. So we didn't want to have to talk to several thousand people to bring them onto the platform. So we had it set up so REDCap would speak directly to Bright Outcome, which then would automatically send the participant an email and say, create your login. And then they would just go through the 5 weeks of the program. And then they would be automatically sent another REDCap questionnaire. Easy. Of course, it was not that easy at all. The program was supposed to launch on Monday, September 30th with a morning edition story. And on Sunday, the 29th, so the day before, we saw that people were starting to enroll. So NPR had put the link up on their website and people had seen it. And not just a couple people, with like thousands of people started enrolling in the program on that first day in the first few hours. And, got a call from Allison Aubrey and she was in tears at the impact that we would have. And oh, isn't this great? And then things started going south. So the first sort of sign of trouble was that the REDCap system was breaking. So people were trying to go through and they would just get, the survey program would quit on them and they couldn't get back in. And then the people who are actually getting all the way through the survey, they were not getting the invitation from Bright Outcome to create their password because Bright Outcome was sending out so many sort of automated invites that they were flagged as spam by every major email provider. So before the morning edition piece even aired, we had to take the link down so people couldn't sign up anymore. So I called the editor at like 2 a.m. and I was like, she didn't pick up the phone. I just left her a message, but I was like, can you not run the story? Because we can't enroll people. Well, of course, the story had been in the can. So I sat there at like 5:15 a.m, listening to my own voice say, yes, enroll in this program. So, we had a lot of unhappy NPR listeners, and my team just sort of dropped everything else. And for like 2 or 3 days, did troubleshooting to try to get people in and to put in some sort of throttling mechanisms to keep people from flowing right through and breaking all the systems. So we did finally figure that out after a couple of days. And then eventually we're able to enroll over 11,000 people, which was amazing. And then of those who consented, about 7,600 actually got onto the platform. So they got that create your password email and they logged in. And of those, 1,500 completed all 5 weeks of skills, and about 2,900 gave us pre-post data. So we had them consent to get onto the platform, but they didn't have to, and then they would get the surveys, but they didn't actually have to answer any of the questions. So that's why we had so many more who actually got on the platform than actually gave us data for it. But still, I mean, previously the biggest study we had run was about 600 people, which was during COVID with the general public. And that was enrolled over like 2 years. So not over about 4 weeks. About 4 weeks. So when we sort of throw open the doors and say, anybody can come into this program, this is the demographic distribution that we get. So 80% white, 77% women. We did ask about political affiliation, and about 67% identified as Democrats, which came to be really important as we, went through the study and the election did not turn out the way many of us expected it to go. I was really worried that, those 67% of Democrats in our sample, I'm like, oh, it's either going to look like it didn't work, and it always works, right? It's going to look like that didn't work, or it's going to look like we actually made people worse because the context was worse. We also enrolled people from all over the country. This map shows if one person in a zip code signed in or signed up, we filled in the zip code just to protect their identity a little bit. Also Alaska and Hawaii. So looking at results, these were the measures we use. These are all Promise or NIH Toolbox computer adaptive versions. So it was very fast for people to fill them all out. And despite my fears, we got significant improvements on every single thing we measured, which is actually, I talk about the program always works. Well, it works, but maybe not across all the outcomes. But in this case, we had enough people to have the power to see the effects on every one of these. And in many cases, it's not just a statistically significant increase, it was a meaningful increase in terms of like the Promise measures. They usually talk about 3-point increase is a meaningful increase. So across all of these, people who enrolled in the program improved. If you like graphs, we did measure their well-being at 3 time points. So prior to the intervention, immediately post, and then a month later. And you still see a nice increase even after they finished learning the skills. These are sort of the positively toned things. You see everything continues to improve. And then the more negative things are all improving in that they're decreasing as well. So one of the really exciting things for this is we, of course, didn't have, I think you saw that we had fewer people finish the full program than enrolled. And we get this really nice sort of dose response such that if you did more of the program, you improved more. So this is on anxiety. People who did sort of the average number of, well, this is percent pages completed. So people who completed the average number of pages, which I think was about 60%, if I'm not making that up. That's in the green line. So you see they improved, over time. The red line is people who did 1 standard deviation less than the mean number of pages completed. They still improved, just not as much as the people who did the mean. And the people who did 1 standard deviation more pages of the program improved that much more. And this interaction is significant across every single one of our outcomes. So we get this beautiful dose response that the more you use it, the more you improve. This is positive affect. Okay, so NPR listeners are a really interesting group to have as research participants. There's someone, actually one of the editors at NPR talked about the listeners as they're all the straight A students who are right in the front of the class, raising their hand every time. So they were very free with their feedback, very free to complain about this program they were receiving at no cost, but whatever. They were really upset with the technical difficulties, which is absolutely fair. So we had trouble enrolling people. The people who sort of got lost, fell through the cracks in those first couple days when we couldn't get everybody in, we didn't go back to them. That was like an intentional sort of sanity saving thing for my team. It's like, you don't have to go back and try to get those people back in. Just, if they want to come back in, they'll contact us. But we lost a number of people that way. The platform was not ready for this kind of load. And when we had talked to our developer early on, we're like, well, how many people do you think it can handle? And he was like, I guess we'll find out. So it had some significant slowing when we first were getting people on the platform. I mean, thousands of people. He then fixed it and got it on a better server. So then things sped up. But initially it was not pleasant to be on that platform. A number of people. So one of the innovations that we did this time, which we had never done before, which again, that's something to learn from this. Like, don't try new things in a sample of 11,000 people. But they filled out their Promise measures on well-being, and the Promise measures are really nice because they have national norms. So at NPR's request, we sent people who completed the surveys their scores on positive affect and anxiety and told them how they compared to the general population on them. And when we asked the questions, we said, okay, in the past week, how often have you felt, or, how did you feel on these items in the past week? And people were very upset with this because often their past week was not a typical week for them. And they would contact us very concerned that they were going to ruin the study. And we reassured them that this is part of the science. Like, some people have worse weeks than usual and some people have better weeks than usual, and it's fine. And sometimes they didn't want to hear that and then accused us of not actually doing science, whatever. One of the first comments we got was, "This is bullshit, and I'm going to tell NPR and all my friends." And then they signed that email, "Kind regards," which I think must have been their auto signature. But my team then turned that around, and now we use "kind regards" when we're actually mad at someone. So if I ever send you an email, Dave McCreary, that says "kind regards," you know what I really think. This was the person. So if you're even doing science, so they then questioned our science. This comment about being really disappointed came when we had to we couldn't leave the platform up forever, again, because it was taking our resources to, like, we were monitoring the discussion board, we were troubleshooting. It wasn't an insignificant amount of work for us to keep the platform up. So we gave them lots of notice, in a month, we're going to have to take it down and you won't have access to the platform anymore. And this person, after it was taken down, said, "Honestly, I'm just really disappointed. I'm sorry." And we also got some of the loveliest feedback I have ever received on any study. So this will make you all feel better. So one comment: "This is the first day in months that I've laughed and smiled more than I cried. I am so grateful for the tools I am learning." Not gonna lie here, I'd prefer not to get my ass kicked by life today. But at least right now, I have a tiny but very real to me visceral sense that being part of life is better than being in that pit of despair, a sense that joy is maybe more than happiness and getting my wants fulfilled, but perhaps instead it's somewhere in this moment. NPR listeners, right? Honestly, I've been feeling pretty good about myself lately. I'm attributing it to this study. Here's a good one. If in our current political climate, I hadn't been 3 weeks into the program, I may not have survived the past few months. So my heartfelt thanks to you, NPR, and whatever force in the universe put us together at the right time. This one was a handwritten note that they found my office address, beautifully wrote out thank you note, put a stamp on it, and mailed it to me. It had a lot more context, but this was sort of a key piece of it. "No one had ever taught me the skills I learned through the Resilience Challenge. I have made it a part of my daily disciplines because it is giving me hope and relief. For instance, instead of a troubled night with fitful or little sleep, I use the breath meditation and almost always get back to sleep. Working on positive reappraisal and self-comfort is a challenge for me, but as I daily write in my journal, I see gradual healthy change. So it is with a grateful heart that I thank you and the team. May God continue working through you all." I was so touched by that note that I sat down and hand wrote a thank you note and sent it back to them. My husband was like, "This is ridiculous. You just sent a thank you note for a thank you note." And I was like, "But we know gratitude is good for you." So I did that. So first I want to talk about sort of lessons learned from taking on this sort of unusual study for us. So we took a risk on doing this. So I learned a lot. This was really hard on my team. And it's hard to disentangle sort of what was going on in the world and then things at work were hard, and they go together. But taking on the Resilience Challenge in the midst of everything else didn't help. Next time we'll be ready for the really mean comments. So, we always get complaints, but we've never run studies of this size. So it's probably the same proportion of mean comments, but it seemed like a lot. And this is especially hard when you're the one monitoring the email box. The beauty of the work that we do, though, is that we can use the skills that we're studying to help cope with the stress of testing the skills. So for example, one of the things we did was set up a Teams channel. And when we saw positive comments come through on the email or on the discussion board, we would put those on the Teams channel for everyone to see. And that's why I was able to pull those up so easily for this presentation, is because I just pulled them right off the Teams board and posted them here. It helps to have a well-functioning team before something like this happens. If your team, and you all know this from if you lead anyone, when a team is stressed, if there were pre-existing sort of disagreements or cracks in the team, the stress of something like this doesn't help. On the flip side, if you've got a really well-functioning team, it can be all hands on deck, like it was with my team. We were having like emergency lab meetings, and I was out of town, so we were doing it by Zoom or by phone, and everyone was literally dropping everything, skipping class, whatever they had to do to like be there to help make this thing successful. Because honestly, our reputation, my reputation, was on the line when I was, in those dark moments when we had to take down the initial link. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to tell NPR we can't do it. I've been working with them for months, and I'm gonna have to say, I'm sorry, we can't do it. But because of my team, we were able to do it. This is an understatement. So the funding model of individual NIH grants to support each implementation of the program is not sustainable. So even before the current troubles with NIH, where you sort of come up with one project and you say, okay, NIH, I want to study this in dementia caregivers. So the National Institute of Aging comes through and they fund us to do a randomized controlled trial of this intervention for dementia caregivers, which is great. But then that doesn't leave any room, if we have an opportunity like this, for us to be like flexible and adaptable and able to be like, okay, yes, let's try this thing, because all our funding is sort of was locked in these sort of silos of NIH that forces us to look disease to disease. I have a lot more to say about that. So speaking of NIH, many of you know what's happening right now to NIH, to Northwestern. But I want to say it in case anyone isn't aware. So we, my program, my department, science and research in general, is under extraordinary stress right now. Like Dave said, I'm in the Department of Medical Social Sciences. We are a department of about 80 faculty in our teams. And our goal is to harness the power of the social sciences to transform health. We are a 100%, 95% soft money grant funded department. So almost all of our funding comes from the National Institute of Health. So several things have happened with the NIH in the past few months. First, it was sort of a gumming up the works of the NIH review process. So normally, when you have one of these sort of NIH funded teams, you put in a grant every couple of cycles, and often it doesn't get, and there are 3 cycles a year where grants get reviewed generally. And often they don't get funded the first round, so you revise it and you put it back in, and it can take 2 years from the time you first submit a proposal for the money to come through. So, but you get on that, and you always have something in the pipeline so that your funding is sustained. Well, immediately with the new administration, they stopped review committees, they fired many critical government workers at the NIH. So, some of it seems to have stabilized in that sense, but the works have been totally gummed up so that we can no longer rely, even if the money were coming through, we can no longer rely on that sort of cadence of grant submission and grant receipt, because it's sort of all messed up. The second thing that happened is Northwestern had 65 grants terminated. At last count, it was 65. Maybe, but we've had a couple more actually since then. But and not frozen, but pulled in the middle. So you might have a 5-year R01 grant, which is $500,000 a year, that is just yanked right in the middle. And it happened 22 of those terminations were in my department or our sister entity, the Impact Program, that does a lot of sexual and gender minority health research. That accounts for about 8 million of the $55 million that our department brought in from NIH this fiscal year. And we anticipate that it'll be another 20 million that we won't receive because many of those grants were multi-year grants that would have provided funding for research in the out years. The third thing that's happened is that since mid-March, all federal funding to Northwestern has been frozen. The way it normally works, and I just learned this, is when you receive a grant, that's like a bank account, a virtual bank account is opened up for Northwestern, and here's the money that we have to spend. Northwestern pays us and then invoices the NIH like weekly. NIH has not paid any of their bills to Northwestern since mid-March. Northwestern's been covering it, and it has cost them more than $40 million a month to cover the research that is frozen right now. And of course, they can't do that forever. So this is where we are right now. So you might be asking how the positive emotion lady is dealing with all of this. So let me just tell you what I've learned over 20 years of doing this work. Life is stressful. So no kidding, right? There is always something stressful for everyone. Right now, for scientists, for NIH-funded scientists, for people at Northwestern, it may feel particularly stressful. There's always something stressful. In response to that stress, negative emotions are normal. They are functional. They serve a purpose. They help you pay attention to what needs attention. And positive emotions co-occur with those negative. They can be experienced, certainly, in the midst of stress, and they can be increased, even when circumstances are really challenging. So here are the skills again. Let me tell you some example of how I'm using some of these skills to sort of cope with this current moment. So the first one is positive reappraisal. This is, making lemonade out of lemons, or finding the silver lining in every cloud, or the sayings. I am a natural positive reappraiser. I used to be able to reappraise just about anything, and quickly, much to the annoyance of my children. My favorite positive reappraisal, and there are different types, one of them is could be worse. So whatever is happening, I could always be like, but it could be worse. You can imagine all the ways that it could be worse. And when the trouble with NIH first started, I literally said out loud, well, it could be worse. They could be terminating existing grants. So, when my could be worses actually start happening, I'm going to stop using that one. There are some others. So one that is still rings true is that good things come out of the situation. I have gained a new appreciation for the leadership in my department, for my colleagues, for my Northwestern colleagues. I really appreciate how much of a community we are and how strong we are, especially when we work together. So don't throw this one out completely, but they don't all have to work for everyone. Another one that is really easy to do is noticing the positive events and savoring. I mean, I say it's really easy. When you're under stress, sometimes it's actually hard to see the positive things going on. And that's why you have to kind of build this up as a skill, like to notice the good things. Here's my current favorite good thing happening. These are folks who work at an organization called UCAN in Chicago. It's among other things, gun violence prevention. They do gun violence prevention work. I have a project, NIH funded, to deliver our program of positive emotion skills at UCAN. And the way we're delivering it is we are training trainers. So we're calling them positive emotion ambassadors. That's who you see in all these pictures. These are our Ps, or positive emotion ambassadors. We have taught them the skills. And then each month, they teach at an all hands meeting, everyone at the organization, the skill of the month. And then throughout that month, they go out and they teach the skills to their colleagues. The third skill of the month was today. I'm actually out of town at a conference, so I didn't get to go see it, but it has been going so well, like beyond my wildest dreams. They learned the skills, they are owning the skills, they are coming up with creative ways to teach the skills that I never would have come up with. So this right now, this project is saving me. There's a chance that Northwestern will no longer support it because they're not going to support subcontracts, which is how I pay the P's and UCAN. But for now, I'm going to focus on how well it's going and how amazing these folks are. This one won't surprise you at all. Gratitude. I try to practice gratitude every day, and it's not always easy because things are really rough right now across, like not just in science. I mean, obviously there's a lot of awful things everywhere. But just taking a moment to sort of note what you are grateful for, the people you're grateful for, the other things in your life that you're grateful for, really helps. And it gives you sort of this momentary respite from all the stress. Then this leaning on community. This is not one of the 10 skills, but it's something we've been thinking about a lot. Up until we started delivering the skills at UCAN, sort of at an organization level, it's been a very individual intervention. It's usually we teach one person. Occasionally we're teaching families. We did a pilot in kids awaiting heart transplants. So if the children were old enough and their parents, we would teach all of them the skills. But I'm finding more and more how important community is. When I talked about positive reappraisal and noticing how all we're learning about working together and working through this really difficult moment in science, leaning on community is really helpful. And like no one can be at their best and at their strongest all the time. So that's where you need to sort of step back, take a break, and let someone else in your community sort of step forward. What are these ostriches? I don't know why when I asked Copilot to give me an image of community, it gave me ostriches, but I liked it, so I kept it. Okay, so that's it. Now we have plenty of time for questions.
Well, Judy, I'll sort of lead that, and I have to share at the outset with people that we have a significant number of questions that were submitted prior to this. So we took the initiative to try to group them a little bit so Judy could get through as many as possible one way or the other. So I apologize if it's not exactly what your question was that you sent in. But one of them was, there were a handful around the fact that we received several questions about teaching the skills you shared to children and particularly teenagers. Can you suggest recommendations for parents who want to help their children be more resilient?
Yeah, so we've done one study in teenagers. We worked at a school in San Francisco and taught it to classrooms. Actually did it in two different high schools in San Francisco. And they were both pilot projects and they both, went okay. What we learned is we needed to make it a lot more fun and a lot more interactive and a lot more exciting. So, we will continue trying to do that work. I think for parents, and I get the question from parents a lot, like, how do I teach my kids these skills? And the best way to do it is to sort of role model it, I think. I have never, my kids are now 27 and 22, so, full grown adults. I've never sort of sat down with them and said, like, you need to be more positive, or, I'm sorry you didn't make the basketball team, but now look on the bright side, you now have more time for math or whatever. Like, it's really hard to sort of force these skills on people. but if you do them sort of out loud around them, they'll pick it up. So one example, about a year ago, my husband and I had flown to San Francisco for a wedding with my older son and his girlfriend, who were living in different cities at the time. So we were driving back to the airport. They were soon going to be parting and they were very sad. And I heard them in the back seat saying, "What was your favorite part of the weekend?" And then she said, "Well, this was my favorite." So they were noticing positive events and savoring. Like, I didn't tell them to do that, right? They just did it naturally. So if you, again, just role model it for them. Sometimes families use like at dinner, the rose and a thorn. So you have them talk about one bad thing that happened, and then you also talk about one good thing that happened, which really helps sort of reinforce this idea that, yeah, that life is hard, life is stressful. This is not all, unicorns pooping rainbows or fairy dust. But even if you've had a hard day, there's always something good that can come out of it. And you kind of help them build that muscle of noticing the positive things too.
Can you speak about how the resilience skills differ from simply thinking positively?
The toxic positivity question. Um, yeah, so and I said it to you all as well. Every time I talk about this, I talk about how hard life is, or how stressful life is, or how negative emotions are normal. This is not about pretending like things are fine. Just look on the bright side, ignore the bad stuff, suppress your negative emotions. That is absolutely not going to work, right? So instead, this is about noticing and being aware of the negative stuff and addressing it where you can. Sometimes you can't, but like allowing the negative emotions to be what they are and not try to push them away, and also knowing that you can increase your positive emotions alongside the negative. So it's not going to make the negative emotions go away, but it helps to sort of balance things out a little bit. Like, you're not going to end up with positive way up here and negative way down here if things are really hard, but maybe you'll bring the negative down a little bit. So yeah, I get that question a lot. So it's not toxic positivity. I don't like that term.
There were a number of questions which revolved around the differences that you observed as you worked with groups from diverse circumstances, such as
Mm-hmm.
cancer survivors, as opposed to Alzheimer's and dementia caregivers, as opposed to NPR listeners.
Yeah. So when we write a grant for a new sample, a new group that we're going to be working with, we try to build in time and effort up front to talk to the people we're going to be trying to deliver the skills in and say, okay, here's the basic program. What do you think? Which of these work for you? Should we use different images? Should we use different examples? The core skills generally stay the same. Because like I said, um, we sort of, they're not like a magical package of things that you have to do all together. It's more, here are all your options. Try all these things. Different things work for different people. Try them and find what works for you. So we keep the core skills the same, but the way we talk about them changes. So I'll give you one example. We were sort of in the midst of completing a version of the intervention, the online self-guided version for people with elevated depressive symptoms. And we had it, all programmed up. And then we showed this program to people with chronic pain. We said, "What do you think?" And one of the first things, which never would have occurred to me, but they were like, "You've got a lot of pictures of like people climbing mountains and doing these like really extreme sort of physical things. And some days I can't get out of bed." So we we took that very good comment and sort of toned down the extreme pictures and made them sort of calmer. Like, instead of someone climbing a mountain, it's a cup of coffee. Like, so just those sort of images and things. We also, for the gun violence prevention work, that was a really nice mechanism grant where the first 2 years were really for tailoring and adaptation and developing the plan for how we were going to implement it. So we had 2 years where we did focus groups and interviews, and we asked questions like, when not even necessarily about our program to begin with, we said, when a program is implemented at your organization, when does it work? What are the things that make it work? And what are the things that don't make it work? Like when a program really fails, why is that? And you'd be amazed. You get a lot of really useful information with that question. Things like, well, the people, the people on the ground, the people doing the work have to be at the table when the program's being designed. You have to ask us when you're going to put a new program into place, because we can tell you all the places where it's not going to work and maybe some ways that it can work better. So by talking with the staff and the leadership at the gun violence prevention organization, we were able to then come up with this new way of implementing, which we had never done before. So this idea of positive emotion ambassadors, sort of a train the trainers. This is really the first time we've done it at this scale. And we usually deliver like 1 or 2 skills a week for 6 weeks, or 5 or 6 weeks. And this time we're doing 1 or 2 skills, and we're doing all 10 of those skills. You might notice usually we have like 8 skills in a program, but we've got a total of 10 and sort of swap them out depending on the sample. But for the gun violence prevention group, they're like, oh, we want all 10. And we want to learn them 1 or 2 a month, so it's not overwhelming. And then we can practice those for that month. And then we go on to the next skill the next month and sort of build it more slowly. So it's a completely different way of teaching it than we've done before. But because we had the time to sort of ask, how do you want to do it? The resilience challenge, there was no time. We also did a version of this for the general public during COVID. Early on in COVID, I had people from our department say, oh, can we have access to your platform? We need some coping skills. So our developer is extremely agreeable, and he said, sure, I'll make a copy. So he made a copy that I was just going to give away to the people in the department. And then I was like, but they might share with their friends, and I should collect some data. So we got IRB approval and then offered it sort of nationwide. So we had about 600 people enroll. But again, it was the version that we'd used for caregivers. And I think we took out the word caregiver where we had it. But the resilience challenge was similar. We had to take sort of a generic version and just use that. And we didn't try to tailor it to, the NPR demographic who wanted things just so.
Series of questions that have just come through that all kind of link together. Is the program available online anywhere? Are there resources to access it? Where can I read about all 8 skills? Do you recommend scheduling some or all of the resilience techniques, or simply implementing them as developments and negative emotions warrant?
Oh, that's a really good question. That last, I mean, they're all good questions, but that last one I haven't really thought about before. I think whatever works for you is the way to do it. So life is always stressful, right? So there are things that I do sort of naturally, and I will use, like I said, positive reappraisal. I do that naturally, no matter what the stressor is. As the stress in my life and the downfall of NIH has gotten worse, I have started to be really intentional with these things. So, maybe doing more mindful meditation or mindful daily activities than I would normally, because that's just not the thing that I do. But I think you can, see which ones sort of work for you in your day-to-day life and start doing those. And then if you notice sort of things getting more stressful, maybe go back to the package of skills and pick a different one and try that, because they're not all going to work all the time, right? So, and then the other questions were, are the skills available right now? If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said, sure, yes, they are, but I can't give anything away anymore. So there are a couple of programs that are similar. And in fact, I've consulted with these groups. One company called happify.com, HAPPIFY. They have a program, and I think their base program is free, and then they may go up from there. And then there's a program called It's All Good Here, just all run together, itsallgoodhere.com. And they have it might still be up there, called the Moskowitz Challenge or something along those lines, that has a version of these 8 skills that Elizabeth Crane, who owns the company, came to me probably 10 years ago and said, I've got this company, here's what we're doing. Could you build a challenge around your skills? So we did do that. It's a little different, but the same basic idea. So those are 2 sort of free-ish available programs.
And in addition, you talked about your app development, which you're
Yes,
working
so
on.
we are trying to raise funds to put this into an app so it can be on the App Store and on the Google Play Store, so you can have it in your pocket. Because right now it's a mobile enabled, but it's a web-based program. It's not an app, which has its downsides. So we are working on getting the funding to program it into an app. There was a question about where you can read more. So my lab website is right there, that figlab.com. FIG stands for Positive Psychology and Health Investigations Group. It's also a tree, spelled differently, but figlab.com. There's some more information on our work there.
Instead of summarizing it, this is a direct quote. In an era of grinding, repetitive, multimedia tragedy and trauma, how can we keep our chins up with smiles on our faces? Did that one
You
hit?
have to send me that one, Dave. I love that language. Thank you for that. Yeah, so yeah, don't close your eyes to what's going on. We have a responsibility to pay attention, and we also deserve rest and positive things. So, turn away when you have to, take a break, let someone else in your community step forward. Try these skills, do things that bring you joy, lean on your friends and family. And then when you're feeling restored, come back in and pay attention to the downfall of democracy again.
There were a couple questions around this specific one. As a supervisor, how do I best implement across a large group the ideas behind your research and the resilience program?
Yeah, so I love this question, because when we talk to like healthcare workers, for example, they like the skills, they're okay, but they then immediately go, but the system is broken and we don't have support from the institution to do any of these things. So the institution needs to support it. So as a supervisor, you're like the first step to making it the culture change in your group, that maybe you check in each day. How's everybody doing? Let's tell me something good that happened last week. We know bad things happen, tell me something good. Or like, you can sort of practice these skills with the group or encourage them to look at the positives sometimes. Again, being careful not to be like, let's just all be positive so you get more work done because I'm your supervisor, right? Instead, it's about, I care about your well-being. I know things are hard right now. These are evidence-based skills that can help you feel better, and can improve your well-being so that you can then continue to function at your best.
You share your insight on the effects of stress and depression on physical health?
Yeah. So, programs like ours that sort of, we call them positive psychological interventions. There are others out there, but all sort of the same idea, practicing these positive skills, improve your well-being, and reduce depression, reduce anxiety. Where there's less science right now is the links that we've hypothesized between improving well-being and improving physical health. So I've recently my team has partnered with the POTUS SNAC Human Longevity Lab at Northwestern, where they measure biological aging in all these really cool sort of cutting edge ways. And they have funded us to do a 250-person randomized controlled trial where half the folks will get on our platform and learn the skills, and half the folks will get, treatment as usual. and we'll look to see if practicing the skills improves sort of these biomarkers of aging. A lot of them are around cardiovascular health, so that those sort of more, I guess, traditional markers of aging will be included, but there are also things like they're doing eye scans and DNA methylation and other bio measures of aging that are way above my head. But I'm like, just tell me what the good direction is in those, and we'll see if the intervention affects those.
Would you share a few thoughts on your personal role models and their advice, which impacted you and helped guide your career path?
Yeah. So my mentor in the AIDS caregiver study was Susan Folkman. She is sort of the mother of stress and coping research. If any of you have studied stress and coping in your psychology 101, Lazarus and Folkman. So Susan was the principal investigator on that caregiver study and was I often call her, she's like my mother without the baggage. So I worked with her for years at UCSF and still, touch base with her when I'm back and as often as I can. So she's been an amazing role model to me, just of sort of doing this kind of work in a medical context. So it's hard, places like UCSF where when I got my offer from Northwestern, one of the deans at UCSF said to me, "Oh, you should go. You'll never be more than a cog in the machine at UCSF. You should go. They actually value behavioral and social science at Northwestern. You should go." But Susan was my role model at UCSF for making that work. And I was there for 20 years before I moved here. So she was definitely one of my biggest role models. There's a quote by Sojourner Truth, who feminist, abolitionist, former slave. And the first part of it is about life being hard anyway, and why not dance and be joyful. I forget the first part, but the second part I actually have on a necklace, and it says, "I will not allow my life's light to be determined by the darkness around me." And I choke up every time I talk about it, but I literally, necklaces, I'm not wearing the necklace, it's right here. But it's sort of a mantra for me to bring me back when things feel so awful. And I just say, I will not allow my life's light to be determined by the darkness around me. And I think that's what these skills can help all of us do.
Well, thank you, Judy. You're bringing life's light to all of us and so many others. Allow me to keep us on schedule and bring this to a close. Please know you'll receive in a few days an email from us. I'll provide a link to today's recording of Dr. Moskowitz's presentation, as well as contact information to facilitate your further interest in her work and maybe your support of it. We're incredibly grateful for your partnership in whatever form it takes. None of us can do it alone. Thank you for being part of our team, and everyone have a wonderful evening. Good night.